there would be so many days I would just be crying, constantly just asking myself, like, Nina, did you just ruin your life by moving abroad? Hi, if you're new here, my name is Nina. I was born in Thailand, grew up in the US, studied abroad in Paris, and now living in London. It's my biggest life goal to travel the world as much as I can and to live abroad, especially in London. And I finally made it happen 2 years ago. So in this video, I will be sharing with you the story of how I moved from the US to the UK. I basically packed up my life in my suitcases, came here with no apartment, no jobs lined up, no friends, no family, basically just started my life all over. Now, I did not have this all figured out. There were many days that I was crying. I was questioning, like, what did I just do to my life? Did I just make the wrong decision to move abroad? But ultimately, I knew that I was following my biggest dream of moving and living abroad. So I was going to make it work no matter what. Now, fast forward 2 years later, I'm here to share my journey with you. Before I did this big move, I watched a ton of these videos and they were so helpful in helping me kind of prepare for the move, just hearing other people's experiences. So if you're someone that's going through something similar, or if you're just curious about what it's like to pack up your bags and move across the pond, then I hope that you will find this video helpful. And with that, let's get started. There will be a ton of information and different topics that I'll be covering in today's video. So here's a timestamp of everything, just so you're aware of what's coming up and what we'll be covering today. Keep in mind that the process that you would go through when moving abroad will significantly depend on so many different factors, right? Like, where are you moving from? Where will you be moving to? Where are you in your life? Are you married? Do you have kids? Do you have pets? Do you own a home? Where are you in your career, etc.? For me, I would be speaking from my experience as a US citizen who grew up in Seattle, Washington, and lived in Austin, Texas for 2 years before I moved here. I was 26 years old when this entire process started. I did not own a home. I did not have any pets, did not have any kids, was not married. I did not have any debt. Really, the only thing that was kind of tying me down from, packing my bags and leaving the next day was my 13-month apartment lease. So starting off with the visa requirement. In case you're not familiar with what a visa is basically an official form of authorization or permission granted by the country that you'll be entering that allows you to either enter, work, or live in that country. And every country will have their own visa rules, and it will also largely depend on what your nationality is. There's various types of visa, like a student visa, tourist visa, work visa, government-sponsored visa, etc. But for me, I moved to the UK under the UK High Potential Individual Visa, which is a government-sponsored one. So now let's talk about the HPI visa and what this allows me to do. It allows me to work and live in the UK for up to 2 years without needing a company sponsorship, meaning that I have the legal right to rent an apartment, because if you're just a tourist trying to rent a flat over here in London, you won't get approved. And also allows me to work over here like any local employee. So the company doesn't need to sponsor me. I will be able to get a regular UK paycheck and so forth. And as a reference, you're actually not allowed to legally work in a different country where you're a foreigner without having some sort of like a work visa or a work sponsorship. And the main requirement for this HPI visa is you have to graduate from the top 50 universities on the UK's government list within the last 5 years. So I graduated from the University of Washington in Seattle back in 2019. So by the time that I found out about HPI visa, I had already graduated for about a little bit over 4 years. So I was coming up pretty close on that 5-year mark. And my boyfriend Derek also went to the same university, so he was also qualified for this visa. So we moved here together. And actually in the application process, it doesn't even say that I needed to get a job. Like, you can just come here and live for 2 years if you wanted to. There are other visas that are similar to the HPI visa. One is like the Canadian Youth Mobility Visa, where it's for Canadian citizens between the age of 18 to 30. They can just come here and live in the UK for up to 2 years. Australia has something similar to this as well. So there are quite a few Canadians and Australians living in London because of the flexibility of the visa that their country has with the UK government. So when I found out about this visa, I immediately applied. The whole process took about 3 weeks, and it was a long list of things that we had to do. But basically, we also had to go into do an in-person appointment where we did our fingerprints. They took a photo of us, and we sent in our passports. And from there, we just waited patiently or impatiently for 3 weeks to get a decision on whether or not we got approved for the visa. Um, Now, during these 3 weeks, I was just like, there's so much that we have to do if we are going to move to London, but I couldn't start on any of that stuff until, we got the final, yes, you're good to move abroad. So the only email that I recalled getting was saying something like, oh, UPS is on their way. They will be delivering your passports in the mail or something like that. Nothing about like, oh, congratulations, you got approved. Nothing about the decision. It just says your passports are coming in the mail. So I remember once I got the tracking like number for this UPS guy, I kept tracking where he was, and I actually took a video of when we got the envelopes in the mail. So I will pop that right over here. So we just got our package.
This is better than a Christmas morning. It's here. Wow, my picture looks terrible, but if you're accepted, then you will have a page in your passport with your visa on. So,
as you can see, I was very, very excited for this move. I can finally get started on all the list of stuff that we had to do. Let's talk about everything that I had to do before the move, starting with finding someone to take over our lease. Okay, so the process of finding someone to take over our 13-month apartment lease, actually, fun fact, when I found out about the HPI visa, we were 1 week into our 13-month apartment lease. 1 week. And we were like, oh my gosh, we just moved in. Now we have to move out again and find someone to take over our lease. But thankfully, this whole process was really, really simple and it worked out really, really well. I started posting on Facebook and like just telling all of our friends that like, hey, if anybody is looking for a 2-bed, 2-bath, we're trying to find someone to sublease our place. And I had a friend of a friend who was looking for a 2-bed, 2-bath, and my move out date, her move-in date actually aligned really, really well. So that process was so smooth. And step 2 was to sell all of our belongings. Now, when I tell you that I had a little e-commerce business going on at our apartment for 3 weeks, I mean it. Every day, every hour, every minute, I was on Facebook Marketplace listing everything from forks, knives, spoons to, our TV, our couch, our bed frame, etc. Everything basically had to go. There were strangers coming in and out of our apartments for like 3 weeks straight, just picking up, stuff that we were selling. We had to just say goodbye to so many of our belongings and basically downsize to what would fit in an SUV. So I'll touch on that in a little bit. The next step is selling my car. Thankfully, my car was already paid off, so it made this process very, very easy as well. I just was basically going around different dealerships and seeing who was going to give me the highest amount for my car. And luckily, I was selling my car during the time that like used cars were really in high demand. So not only did I break even from having owned my car for about 2.5 years, I also make some profit off of that too. So that was amazing. I used the profit from selling my car into like all the moving costs and everything too. Next thing was quitting my job. So the employer that I was working with at the time, it was kind of like a startup. So there was absolutely no way that they would have been able to sponsor me working from London. I put in my 2 weeks. I left on good terms. Everything was fine. And that was really it. And to wrap up our wonderful time in Austin, I threw us a little going away party. We just took a little photo of the party right here. I still feel so fortunate for all the great friends that we made and met in Austin. I miss our friends so, so much. This was a really, really great way to just say bye to the city, say bye to all of our good friends, and time to move on to our next chapter. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Seattle. Derek is also from Seattle, and both of our parents live up there. So we rented an SUV to basically fit all of our stuff and drive everything up to Seattle. So that included everything that we were going to take to London with us, as well as any valuables that we didn't want to sell and that we couldn't take along with us. So that was about a 4-day journey up to Seattle. We spent about a week up there with our family and just really wrapping up a few last minute items. So now let's talk about what I had to prep for like the first few days of us arriving in London. First thing is obviously finding a place to live temporarily as we're apartment hunting. And then secondly is understanding how the rental process works in London so we can hit the ground running right away. We booked an Airbnb in London for 1 month. We actually booked 2 different ones, and this is something that I would also advise if you were moving abroad, is obviously make sure that you have a place to stay temporarily while you're flat hunting, especially in London. I do not recommend anyone signing a apartment lease without seeing the place in person. So I booked 2 different Airbnbs for 2 weeks each, a total of 1 month. And the reason for that was I wanted to use our first Airbnb, so the first 2 weeks, to really find our apartment, get everything all settled in, with the hopes that we wouldn't need the second Airbnb. So the second one that we booked, I purposely tried to find one that was free cancellation. And ultimately we didn't need a second one, so we were able to cancel and get a refund. So that worked out really well. A few things to consider when you're moving to London or any other parts of the world. I would research what the rental process is like. The rental process in London was quite challenging. It genuinely is like buying a home. From my previous research was you basically, right when you get to London, you gotta hit the ground running because the market moves very quickly. And now, after the arrival in London, on the first day, we checked into our Airbnb, and I remember when our Airbnb host came out to greet us, the first thing he said was literally like, "Oh my gosh, you guys have so much stuff." And I was like, "Well, yeah, we literally just moved across the world. Of course I'm gonna have a lot of stuff." So yeah, and having to downsize from like a massive 2-bed, 2-bath to 2 suitcases each was quite a challenge. And yeah, after we checked into the Airbnb, we went to get a UK SIM card. Now, I knew that getting a UK SIM card and with a UK phone number was going to be super, super important in us starting the flat hunting process over here, because it will make everything a lot easier in terms of calling leasing agents, booking tours, and everything like that. So we went to the nearest like phone store called Vodafone, which is similar to like a T-Mobile or Verizon in the US. So we got a UK SIM card. And that night I put in so many inquiries on like apartment that we were interested in looking at. Now let's talk about the flat hunting process. My favorite. Oh my gosh. I will actually be making a whole separate video on how to rent in London and London apartment tours and everything like that too, because oh my gosh, flat hunting and renting a flat over here in London felt like buying a home. Like, it is so much more like complicated than in the US. So we spent the first 4 days in London dedicated just flat hunting. We ran around so many different neighborhoods. And I'm thinking back, like I remember we would wake up like 9 a.m. and our days would finish around 9 p.m., 10 p.m. running around different areas, really trying to figure out like where do we want to live in London, what are our requirements, understanding kind of like what UK apartments even look like and what's realistic for us. We had a total of 18 different viewings, and by the end of the 4th day we put in an offer for our first flat and got accepted. And it took about like maybe 5 days for all the paperwork, the money, the wire transfer, and everything like that before we got the keys. Oh, I forgot to mention, when we signed our apartment lease, we paid for rent 12 months up front. Yeah, that was a big chunk of money. So stay tuned on my next video when I talk about how to rent in London and why we ended up paying 12 months of rent up front. I felt like I was buying a car. It was absolutely insane. So after we got the keys and moved in, we spent the next few weeks really getting settled in. we had to learn how to like set up the Wi-Fi, utilities, you know, everything is all different over here. It's all different companies. We're not aware of like what's a good Wi-Fi company to go with, you know, how does utilities work in the UK and everything like. And also had to do so many different errands on getting our place set up. Like I had to research like which store do I go to get detergent, where do I go to get, you know, a light bulb, where do I go to buy blankets and stuff like that, because again, these are all different department stores that we're not familiar with. So we spend the next like few weeks getting everything all set up. The next is to set up a bank account. So over here, they require a permanent address for you to set up a bank account. So we couldn't set up a bank account when we were living at the Airbnb because that wasn't our permanent address. So now that we have, a UK phone number, an actual address, a bank account, everything like in terms of admin was all taken care of, we can now dedicate time to applying for jobs. Another thing that I would suggest that you would definitely need to consider is setting a lot of money aside. With our visa, I don't remember the exact cost, so I'll just leave it on the screen here. Basically, it said the minimum that you have to have in your saving is this amount to, you know, support yourself when you first get to London. I would like triple time that number by like 10, okay? Like it's a lot of money to move, not just to move to a different city, but to move across the world where you're completely starting from scratch. There's going to be a ton of new expenses that you don't even think about. So I, again, will be doing a separate video on the cost of moving here and maybe the cost of moving abroad. There's a ton of stuff that you would have to consider. Even the cost of like paying for extra luggages, because who's going to move across the world with just one luggage, right? So there'll be a lot of miscellaneous costs that you don't even think about. Having that cushion will give you that peace of mind. Now let's talk about jobs. So we actually started applying for jobs when we were still back in the US, and we would get some screening calls here and there. However, the trend that I was noticing was that recruiters didn't want to move forward with our applications because we weren't physically in London quite yet. Even though I would tell them, you know, here, like we already have our plane ticket, we'll be arriving in London on this day, we have every intention to move there and so forth. But essentially, they just don't want to waste their time on a candidate that might not end up moving to London. They would prefer to kind of work with a candidate who's physically in London. So once I started noticing that trend, we decided to kind of put a pause on our job hunt process. And then when we were all settled in with our apartment and everything like that in London, we started applying for jobs more like seriously. And something to keep in mind as well is when you're applying for jobs in a different country, of course you'll come across companies that you're not familiar with, right? Like these are all UK or European companies that I've never heard of before. So it makes the job application process a bit more challenging in terms of that, like I would have to do some extra research on the company because I've, again, never heard of them before. Derek actually didn't have a hard time finding his job at all. He got his offer maybe about like 2-ish months after we were seriously applying. But for me, on the other hand, I had a completely different experience. I got a job offer 3 weeks into the whole job application process. But I declined that role because I didn't really think the company was going to be a good fit for me. I didn't love the culture that I was kind of experiencing throughout the entire interview process. So I declined that offer. And then from there, it took another 5 months for me to find a job. So from the moment that I, started applying for jobs to the day that I got my offer with the company that I actually went with was 5 months in between. And then it took another month of background check and getting everything all sorted. I want to reiterate how grateful and thankful I am to be in a position where I could be pickier about which company I go with. I didn't want to just rush into accepting any job offer that came my way. I really wanted to take my time to find a company that was going to be a good fit, a company that I can grow my career at, a company that I was excited to work for, and also meet the salary expectation. So if you didn't know, the UK salary band is much lower than the US salary band. So I was just praying that if I could make remotely close to what I was making in Austin, I would be super, super happy about. But I was expecting to take a bit of a pay cut. But not a big pay cut. That made the process a bit more challenging as well, is because I have this certain threshold of salary that I didn't want to go below. Let me fill in the gaps on what happened between those 6 months. Now, I want to be super honest and transparent that those 5 to 6 months were probably the most challenging, but the most memorable moments of my life, there would be so many days I would just be crying, having breakdowns and life crisis moments, and constantly just asking myself, like, Nina, did you just ruin your life by moving abroad? I just left a perfectly good paying job in Austin to now waking up every morning to rejection emails. And I went from a beautiful massive 2 bed 2 bath apartment in Austin to now a small 1 bed flat in London, and basically like double or tripled our rent. I went from having a perfectly great group of friends in Austin to now practically having no friends and basically having to start everything back from scratch, right? Like things were just not adding up. It was just a very, very challenging time. But I do want to give a shout out to Derek. He was always there for me and the biggest supporter. So I genuinely could not have made it through all those months without him just being there for me all the time. I got to the point where I started to feel like pretty desperate to find a job because I was just kind of going crazy. I'm like, what is going on? Like, does no one want to hire me? I remember so vividly one day I was at this cafe working on this presentation that I had to do for one of the final round interviews, and I just did not want to do it. I was not excited about this company. I didn't even like the company, but I was starting to feel pretty desperate in terms of like, oh my gosh, I need to find a job soon, you know? So I remember sitting there and just staring at my laptop for like literally 2 hours, could not even start on the presentation, and I started crying in the coffee shop, like literally bawling my eyes out. And the barista looked at me and she was like, "Are you okay?" I quickly like closed down my laptop and just walked out of that cafe and started walking home. The whole time that I was walking home, I was just bawling my eyes out. Things were just not working out the way that I was hoping it would, and it genuinely felt like I ruined my life by moving abroad. Now, on the other hand, when I said this moment of my life was one of the most memorable ones, it's because I got to do so many things that I never got to do. I got to say yes to every single trip. I was like, you know what? If I'm gonna be unemployed, I'm gonna make the most out of this free time that I have. My friend from the US would be texting me saying, hey, they're gonna be in Greece like next week. Do you want to join me? And I was like, yes, I will see you in Greece next week. And I would just book a last minute flight and meet up with them there. So I got to travel a ton during that time. I got to spend 1 whole month with my family in Thailand, and that is not something that I normally get to do. Everything truly happens for a reason. During that time, I learned a lot about like life challenges when things don't go your way and how to, cope with disappointments and all of that. And then 5 months after that, I landed a job that I was super, super excited about. The salary was actually higher than what I was making in Austin, which I'm so, so grateful for. I just felt like everything happened for a reason. I was meant to be not employed during those 5 to 6 months so that I could make all these life memories. I can spend time with my friends and family and learn so many life lessons, because in the end, I did get exactly what I was looking for. It was a company that I was excited to work for. Everything all worked out. I want to put on this huge disclaimer that if you're someone who's going through something similar, like moving to a different city, moving to a different country, or having a hard time finding a job or anything like that, or experiencing some of the emotions that I just described, and you're starting to feel a bit discouraged, it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And what you're feeling is completely normal. I want you to keep reminding yourself that you are doing something that is so brave. So brave, okay? Like what you're doing right now is not easy. You're completely stepping out of your comfort zone. You're living in a different country. There's so much to learn. There's so much you don't know. Like, it's okay to feel what you're feeling, and it's completely normal. Even if no one else understands it, I understand what you're going through because I went through the exact same thing. And I just want you to know that everything will all work out in the end. It might not feel like it's working out in the moment. Things might not be kind of lining up in the exact timeline that you were hoping for. You're gonna get through this. I know that you can do it. And when you get to look back after, you've gone through all the challenges, you're gonna be so proud of yourself. All the life lessons that you'll get to learn, and you will be thankful for what has happened. I am rooting for you. So just sending you positive vibes, okay? So that basically wraps up my story of how I moved from the US to the UK. I know this video was really long and I'm so sorry, but there is just so much to talk about. So I hope that you have found this video helpful. If you're someone who's about to move abroad, have already moved abroad, or are in the middle of the move, I would love to hear about your experiences. So feel free to leave them in the comments below, or if you have any questions, let me know and I'll get back to you as well in the comments. If you're interested in hearing more about some of the topics that I mentioned in today's video, I will be diving farther into some of these topics. I also make travel vlogs, travel content, travel tips. So if any of that is interesting to you, then please consider subscribing. Thank you so much again for your time, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!